Thank you very much for joining us. If you've just joined us, my name is Aubrey Masango, and you are watching yet another episode of The Truth in Development, a podcast powered by the Ntiyiso Consulting Group. My guest today is none other than Sandile Zungu. He's the proprietor of many businesses, an investor extraordinaire, not only here in South Africa, but on the African continent, respected worldwide. And he's agreed to have a chat with us and just give us some insights into his journey. And Praes, I want to thank you so much for agreeing to talk to us. You and I have had conversations before in the past, but I think that this is a great platform for us to introduce some of the ideas and some of the experiences that you've gone through.
And I must also thank you for the invitation. And I hope the conversation will be of benefit to the audiences out there.
Very often, those of us that are looking from outside in will say Sandile Zungu, the owner and proprietor of Amazulu Football Club, the CEO of Zico Investments. From your point of view, who are you and what is your business?
Well, I always define myself as a boy from Umlazi. In my defining myself, I don't forget the village I come from, because I'm a product of my village's efforts. And I'm truly proud of what that township did to create a pathway for me to achieve the mediocre greatness nevertheless, that I've attained thus far. There's a lot to go. So yes, I'm a boy from Umlazi. I was born there, raised there. I only left Umlazi when I went to do post-matric at Hilton College in 1984.
Ah, you're a Hilton boy.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, so I just did post-matric. And thereafter I went to University of Cape Town to further my studies, and I did a BSc in mechanical engineering, further studies. But as for my background, I come from a very strong Christian valued family. In actual fact, my parents met in church. They were both children of the Salvation Army soldiers, who in turn were children of Salvation Army soldiers. So I'm like fourth generation Salvation Army. We prayed together. We were shepherded to Sunday school by my mom. She was a very strong woman of faith, and so was my father, who made excellent sacrifices to see to it that we were educated. So the church.
Are your parents still alive?
My father is late, and so is my mom.
Okay.
My father died very young, at 51. And my mom died at 76. So the church played a huge role in my upbringing, and so was the veil of education in my molding and my outlook. So those are things that I would say define me.
Talk to me about your business as it currently manifests. What is your business? What is Sandile Zungu's commercial interest in South Africa and in the rest of the world?
Well, when I went about founding Zungu Investments Company, which is really the anchor around my business interests, in 2002, I had a vision that I want to form a South African-based, an African business with a global outlook and presence. South Africa, we're entrenched. Africa, we begin to make our mark very seriously, and the globe is where our eyes are set. And my interests over the years, over the 22 years or so since we were founded, have migrated from diverse interests in financial services to food processing, to resources, gold, platinum, coal, to infrastructure, to property, varied.
So it's quite diverse, yeah?
But over the years, we've migrated to now a very focused group that has got interests in resources, property and infrastructure, school books publishing, and some interests in sports betting, call it a sports industry, including our interest in Amazulu Football Club. So we've actually become very narrowly focused in recent years, which has served us very well. Why? Because the investments we had in various areas, we disposed of them and deepened our interest in the areas that we have chosen as our long-term areas of interest.
I'm interested to find out as we have this as we continue in this conversation as to the decision to invest in certain areas of investment and then the later focus, as you've just described. What is the strategy behind that? What is the reason for going that route? But I want to go back a little bit to the past. You spoke of the influence of your faith that was prevalent in your family for many generations. You spoke of the focus on education. Did you start out at a township school, for example?
I started schooling at age 4 in 1972. I was just about to turn 5 when I started schooling. I went to a lower primary school called Mafuzela Lower Primary School, which was named after the founder, president of the African National Congress, Langalibalele Dube, uMafuzela. Thereafter, I was promoted to a special school. It was called a special school, not because of people with special needs, because all the kids who were doing well academically from lower primary schools in the area were pushed to that special school called Mafumbuga Primary School. I spent 6 years there. Was when I was about to graduate, it was moved to becoming a secondary school. So I spent 6 years, and when I completed standard 8, I then went to a very good school in the township, which was called Vuzake High School then. I did standard 9 and 10, and it is then that I got a scholarship from Shell to do engineering. But first, I had to go to Hilton College for my post-matric.
Yeah.
And the reasoning behind Shell, presumably, was that I came from a disadvantaged social background. And they reasoned it would have been difficult for me to just settle in a much more advanced environment at UCT without first going through a bridging environment where, under controlled conditions, I would acclimatize. And it did. It worked magic.
It did, yeah?
It was that year I spent at Hilton College. It was fantastic for me, really.
I'm interested to find out about the influence of those formative years as a 4 or 5 year old at Mafuzela Primary, and then later on. If you have any insight as to whether or not any of those eras in your life shaped who you become in the business world?
Undoubtedly. They're not called foundation years for no reason. I'm a human. The learnings, even during those early days, will have shaped me for the immediate phase, thereafter, or even for the long term. There was call it a conspiracy theory that there was a person called Pungugani Mazulu. All of us were pulled out of school to go home because there was a man who was making kids turn into an orange, and who was basically snatching kids and killing them. I mean, the whole township went wild because there was a vehicle called Pungani Mazulu, who was going around the township and slaughtering kids. There's no evidence of any one person who died, but the rumor.
It was an urban legend that became truth.
Legend.
Yeah?
But I mean, anyone who was at school during that year, will never forget the influence of that Pungani Mazulu legend. Very much in the same way that looting in KwaZulu-Natal went like wildfire in some July 2022, if I'm not
2021.
2021. It was just as wild as that. No, I mean, what is the lesson from that is that sometimes a rumor can be a reality in terms of the outcomes thereafter. So you need to be very, very careful with the messaging that you send out, because it can bite you and it can shape people's behavior, even when it's actually just that, a rumor, and call it a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
But of course, further on, there are some great friends I met at Mafumbuga. They were all bright students from feeder schools. We all congregated there at Mafumbuga. And I was with some of those students for 6 years, from 1976 to 1981. And we still maintain that friendship. We formed long-lasting friendships with those, like-minded, with similar orientation, because we're of the same, presumably same IQ, in the same IQ band. And these are people I call on from time to time as my sounding board on issues. Great. So it's nice as a person to have sustainable friendships from formative years well into adulthood that you can rely upon for counsel. I maintain that. We may not be in the same businesses, we may not even be in the same standard of living, but long-lasting friendships built in the trenches.
Would you say that many of your contemporaries, even at that early stage of your upbringing, have also grown to be successful in whatever areas of life that they've gone into?
Of course, they are very successful. They are raising conscientious children and grandchildren. Some of them are grandparents now. They are very successful in their own rights. Some of them are ministers in church. Some of them are school principals. The township community look up to them for leadership. And others are business people. Maybe not big business, but they run enterprises that feed families, that provide for communities. And others are civil servants of honor, who other younger people in civil service look up to when it comes to ethical behavior, integrity, and so on. So the success cannot be in monetary terms only,
sure,
but it can be uprightness. And I'm very proud of those people. I know those are people that I met in 1976. And I keep them as my community, as my family. They're genuine into the far interaction as friends, because they don't ask for money.
Yeah, yeah.
They don't ask for material things. They're just there for spiritual counseling, for strength, and to create a social kind of community around me that nourishes.
The reason why I ask the question around your formative years and the fact that you and many of your contemporaries have, in various fields, become quite successful. is because I get a sense that there was something about that era and that background that instilled something in you and your contemporaries. Some people may describe it as a resilience, as a grit. You were all genuinely gifted kids. That's why you went to that school. But very few people. I mean, I'm sure you know that some people have come out to say that talent is always trumped by hard work and grit. And it looks like as much as many of you were talented, and you're a case in point, you were special kids, you were gifted, there was something else that you learned from those formative years, perhaps from your families, from your spiritual upbringing, that gave you the resilience, the grit, the ability to take advantage of the God-given talent that you had. And that's what I'm looking to find out. What was that?
My generation, which has now come of age, like the people in their early 50s to, let's say, late 50s, that generation saw the sharpest end of the apartheid spear. We suffered. We saw the suffering. When the country fled up in the mid-1980s to, let's say, early 1990s, it was my generation which was in the front end and therefore taking all the punches. So if we survived, it's because we are resilient. But the contradictions around what apartheid society imposed or showed us, affluence in white communities, extreme affluence in white areas, abundance in terms of provision of services, etc., and extreme want and lack in our areas will have shaped our consciousness. So our consciousness was shaped in the battle against, call it,
the tyranny of apartheid.
Tyranny of apartheid.
Yep.
You know, and that we emerged triumphant meant that when we're now thrown, when other challenges were thrown at us, we want to show our the fiber that we're made of. That's why we are a resilient generation. We know what we want. We are at the same time hardy. We are like the Nguni breed of cattle.
Yeah,
we are very hardy.
Yeah.
But having said that, I don't want to over-glorify my generation because it also had its own failings. It was our generation that one person described it as a lost generation that had to make choices, liberation now and education later, that Dr. Pteles Mangosuthu frowned upon. But it was a real slogan that some of our organizations took up, and it defined our role in the struggle. So some of our people made extreme sacrifices. They had to sacrifice education because they were being thrust to the front line in the fight against apartheid. And without education, unfortunately, it was to be proven that you actually put yourself on a very weak footing.
Did that create a chasm, perhaps, an intergenerational chasm between those of you who had been blessed with the natural talents for academic and intellectual prowess, who had been brought up in families that valued education, versus the revolutionary mantra of the time? Was there a tension, perhaps an intergenerational tension as a result of those dichotomies?
Maybe you mean intra-generation.
Intra, sorry, not inter. My apologies. Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
Fortunately, there wasn't much of that. There wasn't such a. First of all, the education later, Freedom Now, did not take off, in a serious way, because there were community structures that frowned upon that approach. That said, no, it cannot be. Organizations, political organizations, even emerged to counter that very strongly, because they saw the insanity in it. And so it will not have become a major issue that divided our generation.
Right.
Notwithstanding, there were a few of us that emerged from that generation, highly educated. And the statistics don't lie, that some of our generation didn't even complete matric. Even today, people who start at grade R, 13 years later, maybe 60% of them will have fallen by the wayside. Right. It continues to today, something that we need to address, because you cannot build a society on a tiny elite that completes matric, and even a more tiny elite that goes and acquire tertiary qualifications. So in our generation, there were, the wedges that divided, us. But it was not, to be very honest, it was not the education chasm that defined us.
Right. So you finish matric, you go to Hilton, you do your post-matric, you go to, and you incubated, if I understand you correctly, there was an incubation period where you are sort of made to acclimatize to this new environment that you're going to encounter at UCT. What was it? What was it that you were learning? What was the incubation period trying to do for you at that time?
I came from a school where there was no functioning laboratory. I had not completed any experiment. Mostly, I had not completed any chemical experiment up until the time, because our laboratories were not functional.
Sure.
I got to a Hilton College. There's a massive laboratory with all chemicals you can think of. Sulfuric acid, hydrochloric acid, to mercury, to things that I had theorized and done, mental experiments without really seeing them for real. So that kind of equalization phase was very important for me, that when I ultimately go to university the following year and I'm required to complete experiments to pass my first year chemistry, that I would have had a year of doing these chemical experiments. It was very critical, because it was an equalization year. The same will go for mathematics. I had done good maths because my maths teacher at matric was really good. May his soul rest in peace, Mr. Tabete, whom I consider one of the best educators that I had to go through. But he was, teaching me, mathematics in a township environment. There was more and better teaching methods that I was to be exposed to when I went to Hilton College. I said, so teaching methods, resources, acclimatization in the social context was also important.
Yeah.
At that time, the only people I knew were African people, because I grew up in an African township. I knew about colors because I'll bump into them in town. And the townships like Wentworth were a very strong social connection. But they lived there, I lived here. As for whites, they were taboo. I only met them on the opposite side of the counter and I only saw them as bosses because they carried themselves like that, and the privileges that apartheid endowed them with ensured that I was here, they were there. So now I was to live with them. And so this anxiety, this, call it skepticism, I wouldn't call it fear, skepticism, was addressed by that 1 year of sharing the same facilities with them. Go and share showers with them. We met at the canteen, in class, and I was beating the hell out of them in mathematics. I was the best maths student at Hilton College. And of course that asserted me, that empowered me to think, you know what, I can do better than them. Apartheid is artificial. I can break through that ceiling, and I can be the best that I can be.
Bryce, I'm intrigued by the effect of that incubation period during your year at Hilton, and the fact that you discovered the fact that you were an equal to white people. In fact, in some instances better, in as far as the mathematics was concerned, and I imagine other. And for me, that's quite pivotal, because you say that it made you start to believe that you can challenge and succeed and perhaps even thrive better than people that you had grown up believing were something almost better than you?
I never believed anyone was better than me. Similarly, I don't believe I'm better than anybody. We all are individuals with God-given talent. It just depends how we utilize those talents. We live for each other. We learn from others' experiences and leverage, and we actually become better people, better versions of ourselves. So even when I went to Hilton College, I never went in there with any fear for anybody. I went in there and said, I'm going to show them who I am. And it didn't take me long to enter for the Science Olympiad, to be in the top 100 nationally. It didn't take me long to show them that I was a better mathematician than them. Because I was expecting no one to be better than me in mathematics. Because even at Vuzak, I was better than my peers. So for me, it was a natural swimming into my area of comfort.
I'm wanting to go back to the chasm, social chasm that existed because of our social historical realities that we could probably condense into the word apartheid. You didn't know the white folk in your life because of those separations. You had some connection with colored folk because there was a connection at a social level. But there was no connection at all with white people.
Sure.
Until this moment of Hilton. But there's also the truth that white people were the controllers of economic prosperity, economic opportunities, to the point where many of us in our backgrounds thought that this was a natural endowment of theirs. And almost as if that we as black people were the wretched of the earth, and that was our natural endowment. Something happens to you during that time while you're at Hilton College, where you test your mettle against them, and you discover that they are as vulnerable and maybe as good as anybody else. So there's an equalization of sorts in your mind. Does that have anything to do with how you then behave in the business world later on?
Look, when I went to Hilton College, I was already politically conscious. I went to Hilton College, with an attitude that I'm just an equal. I'm going to an environment of peers. No one is better than me. What they had was better privileges that were given to them by the system. And I was familiar with the evolution of the South African society. I was clear about the arrival of Jan van Riebeeck and its impact on what was to become the South Africa then. I was clear about the role of the gun in the conquest. And it was a moment of history that, or moments in history that I was very familiar with. And I knew that, given a chance, I can compete. And that consciousness, empowered me to display the attitude that said, I'm not here to fight, I'm here to further my objectives as a South African, as a human being. And I did just that. And even when I went into business a few years later, let's say a decade later, it may look like a long time, but from the time I completed matric in 1983 to the time I opened my business, let's say nearly 2 decades later in 2002, I still carried that attitude that said, there's got to be some redress. There's got to be a greater introduction of black people into the mainstream economy. We can't just be the providers of labor. We must also own businesses.
And just consume, yeah?
Exactly. We must also contribute to the growth of this economy. And we operate in an environment where there's a contestation. We operate in an environment which is, broadly speaking, a capitalist environment. We must continue to thrive and succeed in that environment. And I was saying, I can be a player in this environment.
Do you consider yourself a capitalist?
I consider myself a very conscientious, person who appreciates the role of, capitalism, who appreciates the competitive spirit in humans, and who appreciates the need to grow the economy and to create resources that can provide for those who are less able and a position of disadvantage. So if you were to ask, am I a socialist? Definitely I'm not a socialist. Am I a capitalist? I'm a muted capitalist in the sense that I have a very strong social conscience, which makes me very uncomfortable with, call it unconstrained accumulation for accumulation's sake. That says, what about those that are less able? They are also humans that have got ambitions. They need to be given an opportunity to also create for themselves, but from a position of being cared for. What was my own experience? I'm a child of working class parents. My mom was a nurse in a local polyclinic. My father was a factory worker at engine refinery. But they believed in education. They believed in values-centered family nurturing. And the break that I got, which made me an engineer, which ultimately made me a business person, came through a scholarship that came from Shell. And so therein comes giving, providing for those that are less able, who then take advantage of the privilege that they are now given to propel themselves. So in one generation, a child of working class parents, strong working class parents, emerges to become a business owner, emerges to be a provider of capital for new businesses, emerges to compete on par with those who are fourth generation entrepreneurs and beat them in some instances.
You graduate from UCT, you are a qualified engineer. You go on to do your MBA in the United States. You pass with flying colors. What happens after that? Do you get employed? Do you go straight into business? What happens?
I went into business as an employee in corporate in 1989, straight after my engineering degree. I worked for 6 years for various companies, Richards Bay Minerals, Engine Refinery. At the time it was called GenRef, and renamed Engine during my time there, to National Sorghum Breweries, where I worked for people like Mohale Mahanyele. And then I went to do my MBA. And then the intention of my MBA was to move into the world of finance, because I had reasoned. I had qualified as an engineer during the record time, but it was not in my system. This bug had not beaten me, and I had to face the reality that unless I pivoted into something else, I would wither and lose the motivation. And I did just that, took a conscious decision I was going to go and sit behind the desk one more time and to move into marketing. But when I was in my MBA class, I fell in love with finance. And it is this finance choice as my elective that actually moved me into merchant banking. I worked for African Merchant Bank, which was a joint venture between New Africa Investments Limited, company funded by Dr. Ntato Motlana, a great man. Therein worked people like John Sandler, Zwelakhe Sisulu, Dikgang Moseneke, Cyril Ramaphosa, just to mention a few. And this was a joint venture with an American firm called Donaldson Lufkin Jinrat, DLJ. And the exposure that I got in that 1 year in merchant banking was phenomenal. It was to change the trajectory for me into the future. It was to redefine the direction I was to take.
Well, you were an employee being groomed to become a business person who found his passion in finance, hence the MBA in finance, leaving engineering. How do you become a business person?
Okay. Once I was at African Merchant Bank. I think at the time it was called DLJ Bliad. We were advising, transactions. For example, Super Group, which listed in 1996 during my time there at African Merchant Bank. It reversed through a reverse listing. It listed through a reverse listing into a share called Motorlink. I was advising there. The takeover of Jonic by the National Empowerment Consortium, which was made up of various entities like Worldwide Africa Investment Holdings, New Africa Investment Holdings, at some stage Real Africa Investment Holdings, but it was not to be part of it for much longer. Dynamo of Dr. Oscar Jomo at some stage, and a whole of other parties, including Mine Workers Investments Company. I got for a moment an opportunity to advise people that I regarded as heroes, that I'd read about them, that I'd seen on TV, and now they were looking up to me for advice. And they were looking up to me to raise capital for them. That year of extreme assertion was very critical for me and my psyche. And then I was asked by a trade union, South African Railway and Harbour Workers Union, which was a part of that consortium, to say, Zungu, please help us to establish an investment company. Please come to our central committee and motivate for the creation of this investment company, which I did. I went to the Central Executive Committee meeting in Matlosana, Klarstop.
Yep.
And they said, great, we'd love to establish this company on condition, and one condition, Zungu, you become the CEO. So the then treasurer comes to me and says, Zungu, please consider becoming the CEO of this company. Long and short of it, I founded this company, Saru Investments Holdings. Then I began to have personal experience of founding a company. It was not owned by me. I was tiny, a shareholder of 2% in that company, but I was CEO, and I had the skill, but I had not had the experience of starting a company. And suddenly I did wonders in that company. We won awards, Business Map, Deal Maker of the Year. We're in the newspapers almost every second week doing a new transaction, and we're accumulating capital for the beneficiaries. And as an entrepreneur, suddenly, I can do this for others. Why can't I do it for myself? That's when I decided in 2000, go to Harvard for a short-term program called Program for Global Leadership, which was a 4-month program. Came back, my garden leave was done. I was ready to start my company, Zungu Investments Company. I registered it, but I didn't open the doors because when I was going to Harvard, I was in flight with Dikgang Moseneke, who had been the chairman of African Merchant Bank when I was there a few years earlier. And he said, Zungu, now I'm the CEO of NAIL, and we're in the process of merging Metropolitan Life, which was part of NAIL, when I merged it with Sanlam to create a black-controlled life assurer of scale. I would like you to come and join me. I said, okay, fine. When I'm done with my Harvard program, I'll give you a ring. And indeed, I gave him a ring, and they offered me a job at NAIL as an executive director responsible for strategy. So my dream of starting my own company was deferred. But 2 years later, I went back into it, opened my doors. Now I was armed with experience, having done it at Saru Investments. I was armed with extensive networks, which were born out of my year at African Merchant Bank, advising National Empowerment Consortium, interacting with pension funds, administrators, or trustees, interacting with life assurers who were raising capital. Been there, done that.
And you had relative youth on your side.
I had relative youth.
Yeah.
1990, so 2002. Was what, 35 years, and also I had networks now. I was chairman of DINEL, which meant that the political power structures was within my speed dial. So at that time, having those political connections, they are frowned upon now because not everyone has them, which they can use to their advantage. Okay, but having those political connections was a massive guarantor for access to advice, for access to counsel, and even myself, I was then used as a sounding board. I was chairman of DINEL, Nohal, which meant that our own government's tool for international diplomacy was contingent on how well DINEL was doing as a manufacturer of arms, which they could export to certain geographies. So I was very critical in the makeup of the state. that we know today. And don't underestimate the influence, therefore, that I had at the time. So when I decided to form my own company, all of those elements, some of them which were born out of my positions, I was serving on a number of boards of companies, like Ellerins, Adcon, Spectrum Shipping, just to mention a few, were to prove very critical for my company during its formative years.
Zico Investments.
Zongo Investments company.
Zongo Invest. I'm again seeing another pattern. That you were a product of a number of converging factors. One, you were gifted, naturally gifted, but also you were industrious, you worked hard, but you emerged in a particular context.
Sure.
Where South Africa is becoming a new nation. I'm interested to understand what was the character of the advice that you were giving the various companies. What were people looking for from a young Zungu at the time? What were the challenges of the time commercially in terms of business that you were giving advice about that created one, successful businesses, but also an individual by the name of Sandile Zungu, who was a force to be reckoned with at that time and later on?
Okay, let me start with what my partners were not looking for from me, or which they could not get from me. They were not looking for political influence from me, because I did not have any. I was just chairman of Denel. I held no office in any college structures, ANC or ANC government. So they would not have been inviting me to the boards because I had Madiba or Udlamini, Mbeki in first name terms.
You were not a political heavyweight.
So they would not have been looking for that from me, because I would not give them anyway. There are better people, better space people who were members of National Executive Committee or who were officials in provincial or national structures who could offer them that if that's what they wanted. So what I offered them is a systematic understanding of businesses they were operating in. Why? Because I had an MBA from UCT, GSB, highly regarded at the time, even now. So which meant I had the requisite skills to can offer advice on the boards of these companies, which I did. Sometimes with success, sometimes it could be easily disregarded, but I offered it nevertheless. And I also had youth on my side. I was hardworking. I continued to work hard. By the way, I value hard work more than smart work. Smartness will come with time. I'm still too young to put too much effort on smartness. I work hard. I put in the hours. I try, I fail, I try again. I don't tire. That attribute for me is what I think defined me even then, as I build really a fledgling business empire. What I offer them as well is, the ability to analyze situations, which, I've educated myself on that, which sometimes is a differentiator between myself and some of my peers. They don't spend enough time analyzing situations. They may have the tools, but they ignore certain tools.
Go deeper on that. What does that mean, analyzing a situation?
Objectivity is something that many people lack. And they are very subjective in the analysis of situations. They are unable to introspect. to reflect on victories and failures.
Are you saying to me that very often people in your space, your peers, tend to make subjective decisions when there is a need to make objective decisions?
Let me just make a practical example. Someone will say, I've made money in resources, and I'm going to spend more money in resources. And they fail to understand cycles. So look, you've made money here, get out of this. Because cycles, studied over a century, suggest that we are now in for hard times. Get out of here. That's objectivity.
And that is what you were talking about, spending the time to study these realities.
That's right. Even say, look, some people throw themselves and their postures, line hook and sinker, into environments controlled by the incumbents. Someone will ask me, Zungu, how have you survived? You were in good terms with the Mandela administration. And indeed, I was in good terms with Mandela administration. I was in good terms with Madiba himself. I would not call him a friend, because he was much older than all of us. We revered him.
Yes.
But I was in very good terms with the administration. Zungu, you became very good friends with the Mbeki administration. Indeed, it is President Mbeki who appointed me as chairman of DENEL. But Zungu became very good friends with the Zuma administration and Zuma himself as a person. Indeed, I became good friends with Zuma. And Zungu, you're in good terms with Cyril Ramaphosa, and you're in good terms with even Kgalema Motlanthe. Of course, I'm going to be very good friends with the successor. Not because you're a chameleon that changes, you are unprincipled. Because you are very core to values that make you amenable to sustainable friendships with whoever is an incumbent. People fail to master that art of sustainability and longevity. And they find themselves at odds with the successor. And I found myself an enviable subject by those who fail to master that art. Why? Well, I'm not lucky. I analyze situations and I become true to the core of what makes you a sustainable business person. I'm in business.
One of the things you said is that you helped those that you advised to understand the businesses that they were in, that they were going into, to understand systematic thinking. Talk to me. What is that? What is it that you were offering them that gave them the ability to understand their businesses systematically? Am I asking the right question?
You are asking the right question, but the answer is not simple.
Right.
It's not simple because, someone will talk about systems thinking, and every business offers you an opportunity to analyze the challenges, opportunities, threats, using that systems thinking. Whether Ellerins, where is Ellerins today? It's gone. Of course, it was taken over by African Bank. What was African Bank then looking at? They were looking at this, call it unsecured lending, micro lending, which was making Ellerins Bank thrive. But possibly they did it incorrectly. That's why they ultimately went into the administration. I was not on African Bank board at the time, but I had been on Ellerins board up until the time that they were deemed exciting acquisition by African Bank. So I credit myself of having served in a company that was dressed up very nicely for an acquisition. The same with Adcon. During some of its heydays, I was on the board. With Steve Ross as the CEO, but at some stage I had to retire because I had to focus on my business. And I'm privileged to have served on companies, which were successful. And there must be some advice that I offered there. I cannot give myself exclusive credit.
Sure.
Not at all.
Sure.
Sometimes I'll say far from it, because there are much greater and better people as my peers on those boards that I also learned from, who possibly had more gravitas in terms of advice to those organizations as they shape their future. But I contributed.
Yeah. The reason why I asked that question is really born out of the first question that I asked around what is your business? And you pointed out that your business is really an investment company that is involved in a diverse portfolio of businesses. You grew up in a particular way. There were certain contradictions that you had to traverse that formed certain characteristics in you. You were a youngster advising people that were your heroes. You were politically conscious. You had to deal with the idea of being a socially conscious entrepreneur stroke capitalist in an environment that was looking for liberation, but using the language of socialism. And so a certain amount of characteristics were formed in you. You were a stickler for understanding detail through relentless study, such that your influence wasn't just because of your political constituency base, but because of a particular focused value proposition to your clients. And that's why you've managed to be friends with various administrations over time, something that many people perhaps in your business have not been able to do, because their offering wasn't necessarily objective business acumen and advice. This is the question that I've been wanting to ask, building to. You are involved in many businesses. You don't necessarily start businesses, but you see opportunities in businesses that are already running. What is the fundamental thing that you look for? What is it about your investment strategy that is signature Zungu thinking? What is it that makes you sign on the dotted line to invest in a particular company versus another company that would be similar? What is the fundamental guiding light for Zungu in his strategy, in his tactics, and ultimately his decision making?
I look for returns at the core. I will not put my money behind a business where I think my money is better served in a call account at a bank. That's core to me. I don't invest just for pleasure. Even investing in a team like Amazulu Football Club, I've always known that in the short term, there's no money to be made. But I play a long game, that I look therefore at returns in the long term. Sometimes you invest in a business, which in an ecosystem, that business may be a loss driver, but it contributes immensely to an ecosystem where the returns will be found.
So what do you look for? What are the variables that give you a clue as to, I know that right now, this venture is not going to be a money-spinning venture, but down the line it's going to be. What are you looking for? Are you looking at management? Are you looking at culture? What are you looking for?
Look, when it comes to going concerns, okay, I've tried to be a turnaround person. I've failed dismally. So, of late, I don't even look at turnaround situations. When a company is down on its knees and it's a cheap acquisition, because it needs to be rescued from a business rescue, don't call on me for that, because I've realized that's not where my strength is. So I'm not a turnaround person. Don't want to waste my money. I've lost money in those situations. So it's about appreciating as well, what you are not good at, and being true to that realization. I'll be looking for returns. Like I said, it doesn't have to be returns in the immediate term, in the short or medium term. It may be returns in the long term. So I look at a whole lot of things. Of course, you look at management. I will not invest in a business which offers good returns, but where I'm not compatible with management. I don't want to be kept on the sidelines because I cannot get on with those people simply because they're giving me a return. I'd rather not get invested in that. I'd rather throw my money into a lotto, or go to a casino if that's the case. But I want to enjoy camaraderie, good relationships with people who are looking after my wealth or who are creating my wealth management. That management team must be a good management team where there's shared values and I can relate with their ways of creating that wealth.
Sounds like culture is a very important thing for you.
Culture is very important. But I think I don't want to elevate culture to a supreme, trait. I want to look for returns. Where are these returns? Where is this money going to come from? If I invest in a business that operates in the African continent, and they say the returns are there in that local currency, but the returns may not be there because that currency is losing value against the dollar. And I've got to factor that. I've got to therefore look at the country risk. I've got to look at the fiscal posture of that administration or a series of administrations and say, look, do I put my money in that country? It looks very stable, but their fiscal discipline is found wanting, and therefore I'm going to lose my money. And I suspect that's how foreign investors, foreign capital looks at our own country as well. Whether we'll be maintaining a posture of fiscal discipline, will they make returns if they invest for the long haul? If they cannot, they end up being invested for the short term, where they can take their money in and out in government bonds, So you don't want to be in that situation. I also don't want to be in that situation when I invest in businesses. I don't want to be in here for the short haul. I want to be there for the long haul.
It sounds very Warren Buffettish. Yeah, Warren Buffett has always talked about the idea that it's the length or the duration in the market that I want, because then I'll get the returns that I want. What is your philosophy? What is the fundamental philosophy of Sandile Zungu as far as investment is concerned? Is it duration in the market? Is it culture? What is your fundamental philosophy?
It's a combination of factors. I cannot isolate any one of them and say it weighs, it's got a heavier weighting than others.
Very pragmatic?
I've got to be pragmatic. I may be playing a long game, but I'm interested in the behavior. Don't take my eyes and focus me on the long game when that's and force me to ignore issues in the short term. I will not do that. So I'm just as interested in the long game as I'm interested in your behavior as management in the short to medium term. Don't promise me utopia in the long term when you are messing up in the short to medium term. So I'm interested in what is the potential for this business in the long term. Is it in the right sector? Is it in the right industries? Does it have the tools of agility should impediments be found? Can it adapt? Can it pivot with relative ease? If all those elements are there, and does it have the management expertise and talent to can navigate through challenges? If all of those elements are there, it's a hurrah. But in the short term, for example, when it's got excess cash, how does it look after that cash? What is that treasury management?
Yeah.
So if they say, no, what they do with that money, they gamble. And they're playing a pyramid scheme with our short-term capital, then I worry. Why? Because it's going to give them a 20% return in the short term. No, there's no such. Mm-hmm. If you're a short-term investor, promise me, in terms of your treasury management, a return that is in line with the markets, that is commercially justifiable. If you promise me a call return in the short term, then I'm happy. Don't take risks that don't make any sense because you want to give me superior return in the short term. You are taking too much risk. So I'm interested in what management is deploying as tools for managing our assets in the short term, as much as I'm interested in where this business is going to be in 20 years' time.
It appears to me that, and we're going into the home stretch now of our conversation, it appears to me that you are very conscious of not making decisions that are based on ego.
I've little, if any, ego. And I've taught myself to keep my feet firmly on the ground, because as I begin to espouse greatness and an ego that is ahead of my reality, then I'm going to be falling very hard. And
how do you guard against that? What are the exercises that you indulge in to make sure that you are aware of the imposition of ego? Because everything that you've been saying to me in this conversation has been, I make decisions that are based on objective reality. That's what I'm hearing. And that means that there's a big exercise that you do in keeping yourself on the ground. You're a wildly successful man. How do you keep your feet on the ground?
Like I said earlier, when I went to Hilton College, into a multiracial environment with whites, with coloreds, and in the main, as my peers, I knew they're not better than me, but I also told myself I'm not better than them. So you have to educate yourself that in as much as you are challenging others' sense of superiority, guard against your own sense of superiority. So I've had to educate myself all the time that in any environment, there are people who are better than me. Even in business, I employ better people than me. There are chartered accountants in my organizations who are smart. They're not coming here to work for me. They're coming here to work for themselves. And I need to create an environment where they feel they are empowered, they are respected, they are recognized for that. I don't call ranks on people. So for me, that's very important. It starts there. Number two, to have people at home. My wife, my dear wife, even my late wife, where the people I could always trust to remind me, I think you're becoming too big for your own boots.
Do you have people around you that tell you, Sandile, you are being pompous?
I encourage them.
Really?
I encourage them to remind me to watch how I relate with my own kids and what I say to my kids, let alone other people outside. It starts here at home. That I respect even my own kids. I relate with them, I seek advice and their opinions, and I take and fact their opinions genuinely.
What's your biggest weakness?
What's my biggest weakness? My late wife said to me, "Don't be a Mother Teresa." I think she said that because she had observed that sometimes I put the welfare of others way ahead of my own justice. And sometimes people take advantage of that. So I'm an extremely generous person, sometimes to my own weakness. If that is my weakness, maybe I'm conscious of that, but hey, I'm endowed with so much
Sure.
that I can share.
As we close, Bro S, we're in a very pivotal moment in our country at the moment. We've just had general elections, national and provincial elections, and results have come out. There are those who agree that the results are genuine, and some who don't agree with the process. Neither do they agree with the outcome of those election results. But the long and the short of it is that the political parties that contested are now having to form a government. We are hearing in the general debate this word, the markets. The markets want this, the markets want this. Whatever decision that political parties must make to form a government must take the markets into consideration. First of all, what are these things, the markets? Who are these people? 2, what is the best government formation, in your opinion, for South Africa as you understand it?
The most cynical and probably the best description of the markets came from Trevor Manuel when he was challenged, when he was appointed as the Minister of Finance, and the markets response was unfavorable, described them as this amorphous mess. I'm battling to know who the market is. I know that people who move the rand against major currencies, dollar, pound, euro, in the main, will be traders somewhere. And these generally, well-reasoned, educated, skillful young people who report to some structures within trading houses or banks. They develop a house view of where the rand should be vis-a-vis these currencies. In the short term, maybe on a weekly basis, they review it even every day based on the news that filter into the markets. And they decided to take a view where to bet how much to pay for the dollar. And they're influential in shaping the public's view of whether the markets are happy or angry. There's a few of them. They definitely are not into hundreds, or thousands, scores of them. They may be located here in Johannesburg or in London or New York. And those markets' posture and attitudes will be influenced by the subjective issues sometimes. What is South Africa's stance on the Middle East question or on the Israeli-Palestinian question? What is the stance of South Africa towards, land? They factor it. They don't spend hours debating the small sound bites move the markets. Are they important? Very important, because our reserve banks stance on exchange on interest rates will be influenced by the outcomes of those market forces' behavior, whether the interest rates must now come down or be maintained at high levels. So they're very influential and important. But let's accept it that they are not the ones that have voted. They're not the millions that stood in queues to decide. That no one party must enjoy the exclusive right to decide who makes up the executive and who lead the legislature. They're important nevertheless, and so you've got to understand them for who they are. And if they voted, they are most likely exercising their individual rights. If those market forces will have voted, they're exercising their individual right to choose one party over the other. And they've exercised their democratic right. And the outcome is as it pans out. So going back to the issue of where to from here, ANC has got 40%, the DA has got 21%, MK Party has got 15%. I'm running off to the nearest unit.
Yep.
EFF has got 10%, and the rest have got the balance. And depending on who you are, someone will say the DA and the ANC have got over 60%. They're the two largest parties. They must decide. Another person will say, no, the ANC plus EFF plus MK Party has got almost 2/3. And they are all aligned on, caring for the interests of the marginalized black people.
Ideologically, yeah.
Ideologically more aligned. They share a view on transformation and redress. Why don't they decide going forward? My attitude is, it would be better to consider a government of national unity. This idea of a minority government where the ANC can nominate a president with the support of the DA, and in return, as a quid pro quo, the ANC will support the DA leading critical elements of the legislature, is very scary, because it takes us back to minority rule. The apartheid system, where the white minority ruled but propped up by the army, the might of the state's military, is what led us to where we are, or what we sought to redress in 1994. We cannot go back to a system where a minority is propped up by another minority to control the executive, with the former minority being scratched on its back to control the legislature. It's a recipe for disaster. Let's shy away from that. What I would prefer personally is that let's recognize that the electorate has decided no one deserves outright control. Form a government of national unity. It may not be a perfect government, but it's a better government than a DA-ANC coalition or an ANC-MK-EFF coalition. Try and accommodate as many people, make white people who fear that they are marginalized see the outcome as also looking after them, because they see people of their ilk in the executive, and colored people, inverted commas, who will see the Patriotic Alliance as their voice. They must not feel Patriotic Alliance is now left on the fringes. They must see it also finding expression in the executive and in the legislature. We're offered an opportunity, a God-given opportunity, to reset and rebuild and the Madiba magic may shine upon us once again.
Sandile Zungu, thank you very much for talking to us. We've really enjoyed your wisdom, and I hope that the powers that be are listening really appreciate your time.
It's only my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me once again.
Thank you.